Now we're moving west out of Wales over into the middle part of the country, where we come to the shrine of St. Chad in Lichfield. We finally get to Ced's younger brother. Now, Chad is a little bit better known. Like Ced, he is caught up in all of the church politics of the mid-7th century, and if anything, he's actually a little bit more central to the story than his older brother, Ced. And Chad's story is a little confusing, and I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. Chad was a member of the more Celtic camp, focusing on the Celtic model of Christianity. That model, again, was kind of firmly established in the north of England through missionaries from Ireland to Iona and Lindisfarne up on the northeast coast. Their system was based on bishops to ethnic peoples with strong centralized monasteries rather than bishops located in urban centers. I'll skip over Chad's early history, but it's enough to say that he was from a Northumbrian noble family and well connected to the ruling dynasty. That's our friend Oswy that we've been hearing about. Chad was very well educated and highly respected as a scholar. For our purposes, he first makes his appearance when he's elected Bishop of the Northumbrians. This wasn't Oswy's first choice. That was actually a guy named Wilfrid. But because of plagues and other issues, Wilfrid decides to go to France in order to be consecrated. He's gone for a really long time, and so Oswy decides, well, maybe he died, so I'll pick a new one. And so he appoints Chad. Now, Chad has the same problem Wilfrid has. Most of the bishops had died of a plague, and the ones that remained, their orders weren't always recognized by Rome, so it's a little tricky. You need 3 bishops to consecrate another bishop. So Chad actually just kind of decides to do the best that he can. There's one bishop that he knows would be recognized, and then he also rounds up 2 more Welsh bishops, and people weren't entirely sure kind of who consecrated them, but it's good enough, and Chad does the best he can. Now, since he can move a lot faster than Wilfrid, when Wilfrid actually gets back from France, duly consecrated, Chad's kind of already there, so that's a bit of a problem. We now have 2 bishops of the Northumbrians. Now, Wilfrid actually doesn't pick a big fight. He goes back to his favorite abbey at Ripon and kind of hangs out there. Now, he's not completely quiet. He's kind of building up a base of support and lobbying for his position. Now, a few years later, Theodore of Tarsus, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, comes and removes Chad and puts Wilfrid in. And Chad accepts this decision gracefully and goes back to his beloved abbey in Lastingham, where he's the abbot. Ced died a few years before. According to the Venerable Bede, and that's who we're getting all this from, Theodore was so impressed with the humility that Chad demonstrated that he recognized him as a bishop even though he removed him. Now, soon after that, the king of the Mercians, a guy named King Wulfhere, decides to convert and he needs a bishop. And so instead of consecrating a new one, Theodore tags Chad back in out of retirement. Now, he works really hard for a couple of years, 2.5 years, before also dying of a plague. Bede records a story about Chad's death. Chad was praying in a chapel kind of outside of the key monastery when all the monks were actually praying. The monks, they heard the sound of joyful singing kind of coming from one direction, and then there was quiet for about an hour, and then the singing kind of went back to the way that it came. Then after that, Chad summoned the brothers and encouraged them to keep their faith. He told them that he was going to die soon, and he spoke of death as that friendly guest who was used to visiting the brethren. Later, one of the brothers asked Chad about the singing, and he said that angels had come and told him that he would die in 7 days. And then sure enough, in 7 days, Chad weakened and died soon after. Bede tells us that Chad was almost immediately recognized as a saint, and his shrine was kind of the most significant place of pilgrimage in kind of the middle part of England until the Reformation, when it was destroyed like so many others. Now, Chad's relics also have kind of a crazy story. One of the canons at the cathedral took the bones right before the soldiers came. He gave them to his nieces, who remained Roman Catholics. They stayed in Roman Catholic families for a while. They ended up with a farmer named Henry Hodgetts. Henry was on his deathbed making his confession to a Jesuit priest, and the priest kept asking him, "Why are you praying to St. Chad?" It was kind of an odd choice. And Hodgetts said, "Well, because his bones are in my headboard." And after he died, they opened up the headboard, and sure enough, there were a bunch of bones there. So from there, they kind of bopped around. They traveled to France, and they kind of bopped around. Eventually they were placed in a new shrine in the new Roman Catholic Cathedral in Birmingham dedicated to St. Chad. Now, one last note, in 1985, a portion of one of the relics was sent off for forensic historic analysis, which did show that they were bones from the 7th century, so whatever that means. Now, I didn't quite realize that St. Chad's Cathedral and Lichfield Cathedral weren't actually in the same place. I just didn't get that right in my itinerary. And I already had plans to go to Lichfield. I didn't have time to go to both. So do I go to see the relics of Chad, or do I go to the original shrine? Now, I ended up going to Lichfield because I wanted to kind of follow the pilgrimage trail, but I really was torn about this. And I'll confess, Birmingham is a really big city. I didn't really want to kind of drive into a giant city and deal with parking. Now, Lichfield Cathedral is great, and I didn't realize it's also the burial place of Bishop Selwyn, the missionary bishop to New Zealand, who did a lot of work with enculturation. And they've done a fantastic job with the shrine at Lichfield. There's a large icon right in front of the place where the original location of the shrine would have been. And I think the icon was a really great choice. Icons are sometimes described as windows into heaven. The gold you see in a lot of icons is actually supposed to represent heaven. Icons are often used in the Eastern Church much in the same way that relics are used in the Western Church. So there was this real sense of prayer. And the way they set it up with the kind of candles around it, it created a powerful sense of presence, while still evoking the sense of loss. And that loss kind of came into my thoughts and prayers in that space. The sense of division that was represented. Chad's modern shrine is in a Roman Catholic cathedral in Birmingham. His ancient shrine is in a Church of England cathedral in Lichfield. And it's especially poignant thinking that Chad worked so hard to keep the church together. In the end, he was a man of compromise, even though he gave up his own office to preserve unity with Wilfrid. And I thought about all the work that's been done to bring the church back together, to show unity, work like we do in Lennox with the Lennox Clergy Association, and then also thinking about all the work that still remains to be done. So Chad, I think, is a good figure to keep in mind, to think about the kind of humility that we need to engage in, to hold the church together, that we are in a time of disagreement and a time of growth. And Chad, I think, is a good person to pray for us in a time like this, because it's very much like the kind of time that he lived in.